Hi, everyone. I'm just waiting a couple of seconds for people to filter in as you've been waiting patiently in the waiting room. I'm sure very excited, as we all are. Just waiting a couple of seconds here to see our attendee number go up. Okay, I think I will get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jennifer Tafe, and I am the director of the Museum of American Bird Art, or MAPA, at Mass Audubon. And I'd like to thank you for joining us for tonight's lecture. Tonight is the final talk in our free fall online series, The Art of Birds. And we hope with this series that we have broadened your ideas about birds in art and how we tell these stories and who gets to tell these stories. And I hope you're able to join us for all of the lectures in the series this fall. But if you haven't had a chance to see them all, you can access them for free on our website and our YouTube channel. And for those of you who are somewhat new to our museum's community, I encourage you to visit our website and learn more about all of the exciting programs we offer and to learn more about the future of the museum and the beautiful new building we are planning for Concord, Massachusetts, at our Brewster's Woods Wildlife Sanctuary. I would like to extend a special thanks to AJ, our amazing IT manager, and our marketing staff for making this series happen. And finally, we welcome and we really encourage your questions. So please enter those into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And you can feel free to put your questions in as we go along, but we will get to those at the end of the lecture tonight. So, without further ado, it gives me great honor, great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Erica Beade. Tonight, Erica will share her journey, her artistic journey with us, and how deeply she is committed to teaching drawing as a way of helping to connect people more closely to the natural world. Originally trained in the fine arts, Erica worked as a scientific illustrator for many years, which allowed her to combine a love of science and nature with her passion for drawing. Her traditional and digital illustrations have appeared in numerous books, magazines, and exhibitions. And most recently, she created illustrations for our Mass Audubon board member, Lorna Gibson's upcoming book, Birds Up Close: An Engineer Explores Their Hidden Wonders. Erica has worked with clients including Mass Audubon, W.H. Freeman and Company, and the Joslin Diabetes Center. Since 2002, Erica has shared her passion for nature and drawing as an instructor at Harvard's Museum of Natural History. And she also helped to develop the Art and Science in One program in the Cambridge Public Schools, introducing fourth and fifth graders and adult volunteers to nature journaling as a tool to explore nature and cultivate close observational skills. Erica has a BA in Fine Arts from Wesleyan University with a focus on drawing and printmaking. She is an avid birder, which we love. And she and her partner live outside of Boston with their Boston Terrier. So we are so excited to have her with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming artist Erica Beade.
Thanks so much, Jennifer, and thanks to the museum for having me speak tonight. And I wanted to thank all of you for coming today. I will go ahead and share my screen. Let's see. Hopefully we'll have no technical glitches. Oh, bear with me 1 minute. We were testing it earlier and it was, we went to the last slide, so apparently I have to still go back to the first slide. Okay. Okay. Great. Um, One of the things that I love most about teaching drawing are those moments when a student is drawing something and they say, especially if it's something that's they see all the time, like say a leaf or an onion, and they say, "Oh, look, I never noticed this before." I love that drawing helps us to see things differently, to notice more about our subject, to feel more connected to it, to give us some insight. And I really also love how when you're drawing regularly, then even when you're not drawing, as you're just kind of going about your day, you tend to notice more and notice differently. I love that drawing kind of opens up the world in that way. So it's one of those. Oh, sorry, I need to go back for a second. Um, I'd like to share some of my experience in this talk, working at the intersection of art and science, as Jennifer said, but also some of the teaching that I've done for the past 25 years. Up until my 30s, I was really reluctant to teach. It was just not appealing to me for whatever reason. But it turned out to be something that was really, really rewarding in my life. I learned a lot doing it. It's just the way you have to learn a lot in order to explain something to different kinds of people. But also just working with people on drawing and working with people on nature observation, it just has generated some great conversations that got me thinking about all sorts of things. And so just, all sorts of things like, what a drawing is made of, something we don't think about that much. And how do we perceive and then convey what we see in nature? So I wanted to touch on some of those things today as well. So, so I was one of those kids who was always drawing from a pretty early age, and I've always loved animals, particularly birds. Here's my proof of that early interest, and I think it's somebody very neatly wrote this is a snake, but clearly from my bird interest, this is probably a duck. um, so when I was in grade school, we lived in Toronto, Ontario, in a apartment building. So it was a very urban kind of environment. But we had a small balcony that overlooked a row of poplar trees in the backyard. And Toronto is really well situated to see migrating birds. So it's because so if you look at this map, this is the migratory flyways that go across North America. And Toronto, if you can see my cursor, is kind of just right in this area where you can see the Great Lakes. And so the Mississippi Flyway and the Atlantic Flyway kind of overlap in that area. And so there are just tons of birds coming through. And I would see all sorts of birds in the trees out back. They'd just be stopping on their way to wherever they were going. And my parents would set me up outside on the balcony with a pair of binoculars and a Peterson field guide, and I would watch birds like warblers coming through. These are sort of if you're a birder, these are Roger Torrey Peterson's famous confusing fall warblers that are in their non-breeding plumage and kind of hard to identify, but they're all just these incredible jewels just dancing around in the trees. When I was 6 or 7, though, I started my eyesight started to deteriorate really badly. And I didn't know it at the time, but my parents were told that I was going blind. This obviously came as a shock to them. My father went out and he bought, sort of splurged on 3 big, beautiful volumes of these watercolor paintings by J.F. Lansdowne. This is covers of 2 of those books, and they're just these beautiful, beautiful books. I was really lucky in that my left eye stabilized. My right eye is still pretty bad, but the left eye stabilized. But these books had a really, really lasting impact on me. So as you can see, the watercolors in them were just stunning, just incredible. But the thing that really grabbed my attention and has stuck with me since then are these preparatory drawings. So for each watercolor on one page, they would have a whole page of preparatory drawings that the artist used to produce the watercolor. And I love that you can see in here as the artist sort of thinking processes, they're figuring out, what angle, what positions the bird takes and what angle he might use for his final painting. And you can see him sort of figuring out simple shapes, what are those simple shapes that underlie the more complex shapes, watching it, see how light falls on those shapes, experimenting with feather textures. And this is something that I teach a lot in drawing is that idea of looking for the basic shapes, the big generalized shapes that underlie the forms. Um, I think that's a really, really helpful way to start. Here's another example from one of those books, and this is a much more polished drawing, so you can see how he developed these things over time. Oops, sorry about that. But you can see here, there's also one of those just really, really quick, rough sketches capturing those big shapes. Some of you might have used those books as kids, draw 50 animals, and it's all sort of creating them out of circles and ovals and triangles and things. And this is that idea, just maybe a little bit more sophisticated, but it's still the basic idea of building your drawing on the page using these shapes. Another book that we had was this book, The Art of Glenn Lotes. Glenn Lotes was a Canadian wildlife artist. And again, it had these beautiful detailed watercolors, but also great drawings. And Lotes's drawings are ones that I use a lot when I'm teaching drawing to share with students because he just had this beautiful, energetic, confident line. And you can see him sort of that thought process thing again in this beautiful polar bear. You can see how there's sort of finding a center line and figuring out how things line up. But at the same time, that bear, even with those lines there, just looks very alive to me. I learned mostly from books as a kid, and one of the books that was particularly inspiring was Jim Gurney and Thomas Kincaid's The Artist's Guide to Sketching. It was hard to get for a while, but he's just come out with a new edition. And it was just great the way he explained and broke these things down and sort of showed that process, that building process on the page. You can see it with the monkey here, how he's sort of figuring out the angles and he's using guidelines to line things up. So that's something that I'm always teaching with. And Jim Gurney is one of these people who's just incredibly generous with his knowledge, and he shares a lot on his website and through his Substack now. So I recommend checking him out if you're interested in drawing. Just a really, really generous person. When I was 16, my mom traded her car to an artist friend for some drawing lessons for me, and those were really, really formative as well. During the lessons, I learned how to do that kind of thing of sort of building the drawing gradually over time, and I also learned the value of copying to learn from artists that you admire. Um, and this is something I really encourage people to do in classes. It's an incredible way to learn. You get a little sense of what the artist's thought process is as you copy, but I think most importantly, we don't tend to think of drawing as mark making. We don't think about it, just like kind of hone in on that idea about drawing. But when you copy, you have to sort of physically make the marks that the artist made and feel what that feels like. And the idea that you're experimenting with them and then you're actually doing the physical movement kind of sort of logs them into your sort of bank of your visual library, I guess, of marks that you could make. So I want to take a little brief aside about mark making with the help of these details from a drawing by Sarah Semblett. So each of these is taken from the same drawing, these squares. So a drawing is made of, if you think about what a drawing's made of, it's made of marks, which includes lines. Lines are just elongated marks. Tone, which is sometimes smooth, think of like a watercolor wash or if you smudge with your finger. But tone can also be made of marks. You can do things like this cross-hatching down here to create areas of tone. Possibly color, like color's another aspect of that, but it's applied also as marks or as tone. And then importantly, the space between marks and lines and tone. So where you leave the paper blank is also really important to how the drawing turns out. And I love this quote from John Cage: "The material of music is sound and silence. Integrating those is composing." I think this really applies to drawing as well. So it's that areas where you get empty bits of paper, that those are those silent moments. So amazingly, all of those marks can come together to create and convey something really detailed and interesting. So those marks all came from this pitcher plant drawing. And here you can see all of them together. Here you can see them a little bit more close up. See. So the kind of marks that you use to create an image become a kind of a language. And our brains are just incredibly good at translating those languages, sort of looking at all those marking systems and understanding what's going on, what the artist was trying to get across. So if you look at this Morandi drawing, it's made up mostly of these diagonal lines placed close together, and some of them are piled up on top of each other to create darks, and in a couple of places you get just that white of the paper coming through. And we translate that very easily. We can understand what's going on. And then we can switch back and forth to look at a drawing like this that's made with, has an outline to it, but it's otherwise composed mostly of little dots. And we can just go back and forth very easily and translate those things into what the artist is trying to convey by, as long as they've captured some range of values and the range of values could cohere into an image that makes sense. So mark making is one of those things that I think makes drawing really a powerful way to communicate ideas, and copying from other artists as a learning practice is just a really great way to learn, and to sort of build that visual library. So I went to college at Wesleyan University, and it was a great experience there. It was a great liberal arts education, and I had some great classes, drawing classes. I met great people there, including my partner Hillary, who is also an artist, an illustrator, and also a designer. And we've collaborated on illustration over time, but we also, I think most importantly, we've been kind of sounding boards for each other and a fresh eye. So when you're deeply immersed in a drawing, it's really hard to um, sometimes even see it after a while. And so to have somebody come and look at it with a fresh eye and be able to give you constructive feedback is incredibly helpful. These are a couple of drawings. These are actually really large charcoal drawings from my undergraduate thesis exhibition, which was drawings and prints of shells that I borrowed from the zoology department. So I had some, I'll just go back for 1 second. I had some great drawing classes in college, but they kind of reinforced a tendency toward perfectionism. And that's something that I sort of dealt with for a long time. I'd say sort of decades of my drawing life. I've really been very self-critical and very worried about the final product. Really wanted things to always work, and that's not really a good way to learn. So when I teach, I really try to help people get rid of that mindset, that idea that they're focused on producing a final product. Um, so I try to teach drawing now as an exploration of materials and subject matter with a focus on process. It's amazing how many people, I mean, just all the time, people come to classes and they say they stopped drawing as kids because they had a bad experience with an art teacher or with a friend or a family member who was just really good at drawing. So they felt like they themselves didn't have a talent for it, so they stopped. This is sort of a pet peeve of mine. People think that if you're learning a musical instrument or you're playing a sport, you have to practice to get good at it. But people with drawing, for some reason, think that it's either a talent that you have or it's a talent that you don't have. But drawing's a set of skills like any other, and so like sports or music, it comes more easily to some people, it's harder for other people. So if you practice regularly and you think about exploring and you focus on the process, you can really build your skills much better, and it's more fun in the process. Um, After college, I worked at the Fine Arts Library at Harvard, and I discovered the Harvard Museum of Natural History, which is a wonderful place. Back there in the 90s, early 90s, this was when you walked in, it still felt like the 19th century. The galleries hadn't been modernized at all, and it was just really quiet too. It hadn't really quite been discovered, it seemed like. So I would draw there a lot on my lunch hours. And I love this photo from Tony Ronaldo. This is not me. But this is somebody drawing, and you can in the galleries, and you can see them really sort of what that feels like, that kind of immersive experience of being surrounded by these creatures. So it's a great place to go draw. I also took some classes at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts, still working with natural forms. That's sort of been my focus all along. I had a teacher who noticed that I was very nitpicky, and I only worked in black and white. And so she challenged me to only work in color and to work with some sort of big chunky foam brushes that were kind of awkward to work with. And it was fun to do that, to kind of go to completely different materials and see what happened. And so this is something I recommend to people a lot, is if you're in a bit of a rut with your drawing, change materials, work bigger or larger than you've been working, change subjects kind of radically, and you sort of get a new energy, and you sort of come up with things that you never even knew that you had in you, and then you bring them back to what you were doing before. So something that's really helpful. I did a lot of realistic still life during this time too. This is a pencil drawing. And I was doing a lot of reading of Stephen Jay Gould and other people who are just really great at telling stories about science, really engaging people in science. And I was particularly interested in evolution. Just this idea that this incredible diversity of natural forms that we had formed over vast periods of time, but also that there's this underlying understandable genetic processes going on that we could sort of suss out. And so I sort of got into this idea of working with grids, so natural forms and then grids. This is one example of that. Just trying to get at that contrast between that very structured process underlying things and then these incredible forms. I also did some very abstract pieces during this time in pencil. So this is just kind of a celebration of natural forms, but from my imagination, just kind of coming up with forms. But you can see that underlying grid still kind of hiding in there, though it's a bit more subtle. Another one of those pencil drawings, just kind of exploring shapes and forms. So I went off to grad school for a year for printmaking at the University of Wisconsin, and I had some great classes there. But I came back to Boston. I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do. They were training art professors there, and I didn't think that was what I wanted to do. So I came back, and I took a job at MIT as an administrative assistant. And I happened to come upon this book at the Cambridge Public Libraries, where I hung out a lot in the stacks there. And I was just browsing and I found this book, The Guild Handbook of Scientific Illustration. And it was like a revelation. I had no idea that people still did scientific illustration. I thought it was something from way back in the past, sort of some 19th century activity. But apparently it was alive and well, and it was really represented well by this organization, the Guild Handbook, I'm sorry, the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, or the Guild or GNSI, because that's kind of a mouthful. Just to give you an example of the kinds of things that are inside. um, Great explanations of how light falls on form and how to capture that to create a sense of three-dimensionality, or this great drawing by William Barry where he's sort of helping you understand chicken anatomy by looking at sort of what a person standing in that same position, how they would be standing, like they'd be standing up on their toes rather than their feet flat on the ground. So it's a really helpful way to understand what's going on with a chicken or a bird. So I took some classes. I found out that there were some classes at RISD, at Rhode Island School of Design. They even had a natural science illustration certificate program, which I'd never heard of before. And I ran down. I was working full time, but I took train down to Providence to take classes with Gretchen Halpert, who's a wonderful artist and teacher. Um, Took botanical drawing with her. This is a drawing I did for that class. And also medical illustration, so botanical and medical, and she taught us the fundamentals of those things. Um, just really, it was really exciting to be working with these forms. And if you've ever been down to RISD, they have this nature lab where you can go and draw all sorts of wild things. Here's Gretchen with one of her beautiful botanical drawings. These days she runs the Scientific Illustration Distance program and teaches these things to all sorts of people, new generations. I also took some classes at the Harvard Museum of Natural History, one with Laszlo Mazzoli, who's an illustrator there, who taught the pen and ink stipple technique. So this is with a technical pen making lots of little dots. And because you can control how easily, and subtly how close these dots are together or how far they're spread apart, you can really get a great sense of the topography of form. You can get lots of subtlety, and that's great for scientific illustration. So it's a very common way of drawing that. I also took a class with Catherine Brownwing where we explored using watercolor with colored pencil. So the watercolor, this just kind of shows the technique. The watercolor sits underneath as this kind of very light, pale layer, and then you build layers and layers of colored pencil on it, and it's kind of just luminous, that translucence of the watercolor and then the rich color of the colored pencil on top of it. Really neat technique that I've used a lot. I also got involved with the Guild of Natural Science Illustrators, both the national organization and the New England chapter. And I had not really been a group person before, but this is an amazing community of people who love what they do and they love sharing the knowledge that they have. So I started going to their annual conferences and just loving learning from all these amazing people. And I got my first illustration job through a contact at the Guild, who introduced me to John Mitchell, who edited the Sanctuary magazine, so Mass Audubon's Sanctuary magazine. which is missed, I think, since it's been gone. So my first job was doing a DNA strand and a nematode, and then I got this job doing a two-page spread of shells of New England, and I really enjoyed doing this, and it was great to just be doing drawings that were published that kind of went out into the world and helped people to see, understand nature. Working at MIT, I met a lot of professors who were doing, research papers or writing books and needed illustrations. So I did a lot of textbook illustration at that time, which I also enjoyed. It looks, this is very different work than the other work that I was doing, but I loved it because every new job I got to learn something new. And for these, I got to sit down with the professor of, science or, whatever aspect of science, and they would explain to me in detail what they were trying to get across. And then we would go back and forth trying to, like, how do you visually get across these complex ideas? So it was a really, really fun and challenging and interesting way to work. So at that time, I also had to do a lot of promotional pieces to send them out to try to get freelance jobs. And I just wanted to share this one because it's an editorial illustration. I wanted to do something eye-catching, but it's still kind of thinking about those ideas of that genetics that underlies the forms that we see. So it's just playing with that idea. And I loved that these illustrations went out into the world and they kind of did their own thing. And so here's an example of some patient education materials for the Joslin Diabetes Center, just helping people understand how to administer insulin. Jones and Bartlett Learning, a training manual for emergency medical personnel. This one's actually just showing how to remove a ring that's stuck on somebody's finger. And this is for a surgical procedure. Um, I did this illustration for a maze design for an exhibit. It was actually built into a three-dimensional snake that was hinged so that it kind of popped up out of a drawer when it was pulled open. This is for the Perot Museum of Nature and Science in Dallas. And Hillary helped with a lot of this, because I really had trouble getting those scales to wrap around. So that was a tricky one. Also getting the snake to be not too scary, but not too cartoony, and sort of in the middle. Um, illustrations, when I first did those illustration jobs, they were pen and ink. But at that time, illustration was really becoming digital more and more. There's still plenty of people who do traditional illustration, but digital is kind of the main thing. This is a lot faster, more efficient. If your pen bleeds all over your drawing, then you don't have to start from scratch. You can just kind of do a Command Z. Digital illustration I do with a tablet and a stylus like this, and the drawing is up on the screen. So you're kind of working down here, but the drawing's in front of you. Let's see. I wanted to take a little side road here to talk about digital painting because it's not something that a lot of people understand how it works, and there's no reason you should because it's not really very intuitive. Um, but we all know sort of with a painting or a drawing that you're sort of applying pigment to a surface and you're building it up and that's creating an image. But what is a digital painting? What's exactly going on? So I just wanted to show an example here. This is a digital photo image done in Photoshop. These are some photos by my friend Sherry Leffert, who's a great photographer of birds here in Cambridge. It's a great blue heron with a catfish from Mount Auburn Cemetery. And I love this photo, and it just seemed ripe for a painting. And I love the light on this bird. The catfish is great too, but there's not a lot of detail, and I like this angle, even though I like the bird in this one. So one nice thing about drawing is you can kind of take bits and pieces from different drawings and different photos. So I started with a tracing that kind of helped me sort of put these things together, the catfish in one position and the bird in the other. So you can see that tracing very lightly there, I think. And then I'm just laying on pixels instead of pigment. And they're just colored pixels, and I'm just kind of brushing them on with brushes onto a virtual surface. So you saw the computer screen, and I'm doing that with the tablet. Those tablets were really clunky when they first came out. They were really terrible. But they became pretty quickly really excellent at getting sort of the pressure that you were putting with your pen and how you were tilting it. So they started to be really feel like they were hand done because of that sensitivity and because the computers got so much faster. So that you could so that you could you sort of feel like you were really painting with charcoal or whatever. I was trying to get a charcoal effect in this image. Um, Here you can see the catfish in various stages sort of building up that tone. So the photographs are used as source material. It's not that I'm manipulating a photo in the image, though you can do that too, but just to give a sense that there's a little bit of a difference there. Um, let's see. I'll just sort of show one more example here. This is another image done in the same position as from another Sherry Leverett photo. And here's a couple of the preparatory images kind of building up the tone and sort of see it coming together a little bit. I haven't been doing a lot of illustration these days. I've been drawing more for myself and teaching a lot. And I've also always had a part-time job of some kind to sort of support the art habit. But I was approached by Lorna Gibson, who Jennifer mentioned. She's a professor of material science and engineering at MIT. And she was working on this book, Birds Up Close, and needed some illustrations for it. And this was my dream illustration job. It was great drawing viruses and patient education material images and things like that, but I still loved birds from those days, and I love to draw them. It's sort of my favorite subject to draw. I wanted to tell you a little bit about making those images, but here you can see the cover of the book, which is coming out April 28th. I'm very excited to see the final book. I just thought I'd talk a little bit about how we worked and some of the images we came up with. So one of the images that Lorna was working on was something to show 12 different bird heads highlighting their bills, so you could really see all the different forms that the bills took. And the way that would work is she would give me a description of what she wanted, and I would start to look at photographic resources, and I would start to do lots of sketches of, in this case, a hummingbird head, trying to understand it, trying to figure out how to make the bill look right. And I would come up with a sketch and send it to her, and she would then comment on it because we were trying to be scientifically accurate, right? And so we would go back and forth a bit if there were hitches or if it wasn't clearly enough showing some feature of the bill that she wanted to show. And once that was done, I would go back and start building up on the sketch. So this is a pencil drawing. These first few stages are just pencil, and then I scanned the pencil in and I put this dark line here and the sort of the dark on the eye. I added that afterwards just to kind of make it pop on the page, so it was a kind of nice mix of that traditional pencil and then the digital illustration. Here's another one that we worked on together. That's a barn swallow. And here's the final illustration with all 12 bird heads and the labels with the different species, and you can really see how you can see all those just huge variety of bills in there and start to understand a little better. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how I got into teaching in the first place. And I would think if I had to answer very quickly, I would say Claire Walker Leslie. I met Claire. Some of you may know of Claire or know her books. I met her in, I think, around 1998 through the Guild. Claire is just a passionate, I've lost my words. She's passionate about getting people to draw in order to really connect with nature. And she said that, for people to feel a sense of stewardship to nature, they have to also feel connected, and that drawing's a great way to get them connected. And she really, really was sort of pushing me, saying, you need to teach, you need to teach. At the time, I was trying to get the illustration business set up, and I was kind of reluctant to teach, but she's very persuasive. So some of you might know her books because of her nature journal illustrations. This is a detail from one of those. And she's just written all these books about how to draw from nature, and other books about just that connection between people and nature and the drawing aspect of it. So Claire's just very, very persuasive. And one day she called and she said she had a grant to teach in the Somerville Public Schools for a 6th grade class to teach them nature journaling. And would I like to come at least once and just check it out? And I'd lived very close to the school, so it was sort of hard to say no. And I thought, oh, well, I'll just go check it out. But within about 15 minutes, I was sold on the whole thing. It was quite amazing. I was they're sixth graders. They're 11 or so. They have that kind of self consciousness of kids of that age, and they're really working hard on not being very interested or not appearing to be very interested in things. So some kids were really, really attentive, and other kids were really working hard on being disinterested. Um, and Claire took them out into the schoolyard, which was mostly cement with some kind of scraggly little plantings at the edges. And she brought them over to some yew bushes, and she got them kind of counting the needles on the yew, and drawing them in just those blue exam books with a number two pencil, nothing fancy. And that's all it took, bringing them outside, um, giving them that kind of attention and directing their attention to something that they hadn't really paid attention to before, something in nature. It was really just that. And we went over to the sidewalk. There were some catalpa seed pods on the sidewalk, and they'd clearly been walking over them for a long time. A lot of them were crushed, but they hadn't really noticed them. And Claire pointed them out, and she picked them up, and she said, what do you think's inside? And the kids were like, I don't know. Most of them just had no idea what was going to be inside. So then opening them up and seeing the seeds and then sitting there and drawing them was kind of a revelation for them. I noticed a woodpecker in a tree was posing really nicely, and I pointed it out. They all rushed over with their books and started sketching immediately. Um, there was something magical about just that having the sort of task of drawing that slowed them down and got them looking really really closely and seeing things that they hadn't seen before that were kind of all around them. So I was pretty hooked on that pretty quickly. Um, since then, I've heard Claire say, when you draw something, you care about it. And that's something I think about all the time and has just turned out to be incredibly true. So, Claire recommended me for a job teaching at the Harvard Museum of Natural History, a program called the Animal Artists Club that she had taught for years and that Sandy McDermott taught after her. Sandy was moving out of town, and they hired me to teach this program. I wound up teaching it for years and years, so working with kids on all sorts of animal drawing. And it was a great experience getting the kids close to the animals and talking about natural history with them and getting them looking really closely. Here's a couple of drawings from that time, student drawings. I just love these, looking back on them. So I did that for years. I also ended up teaching adult classes there, and I still teach those adult classes both at the museum and online. Let's just go back for a sec. And I sometimes some of my favorite classes I get to teach with Harvard scientists. So I've taught classes like, with the art and science of insects, or the art and science of bird nests, or bird coloration, or mushrooms, and to get to teach with a scientist and sort of incorporate the drawing and the science in that way has been really great. So around 2012, we're running a little low on time, I met Julie Croston. Julie had also founded the Cambridge Wildlife Arts Program, so another way of connecting arts and science. And she wanted to start a program in the Cambridge Public Schools at the Tobin Montessori School, where she would get kids out nature journaling with adult volunteers. I know Jennifer mentioned this at the beginning. And she'd gotten some funding from the Cambridge School volunteers, and so to start a pilot program. So we developed those activities for the program together. Just a quick mention of what nature journaling is. So this was a nature journaling program meant to get kids outside, sort of drawing and noticing things in nature. So nature journaling is just a way of keeping a record of what you see in nature, using drawing and writing. And taking the time to do that nature journaling really kind of helps you focus in and slow down. And I always say that the drawing for nature journal isn't like about making a beautiful picture. It's more like making a diagram, which is kind of a more accessible thing for a lot of people. I used John Muir Law's and the California Native Plant Society's book, Opening the World Through Nature Journaling. This is a free resource online. See John Muir Law's wonderful nature journal pages here, just really clear, sort of really exploring these shapes and the seeds inside a pine cone. So that Art and Science in One program has been running since 2013, first at Fresh Pond because the school was near there, and then More recently, while the school was being rebuilt, we were in near Central Square, out and doing sort of urban nature journaling, and that's been just an amazing experience to get kids out there with adult volunteers. At Fresh Pond, we also had the help of Ranger Gene Rogers, who just was incredible at just finding interesting things and then making them really engaging for the kids. You can see it was also very engaging for the volunteers. You can see here a couple of the kids' drawings. You know, we always do metadata. It's John Muirlaw's idea, capturing the date and the time and the location and the weather. And so that gives the context for all the observations that you make. And here's just two different kids observing things very differently. So observing a group of flowers and then looking at one really closely. So we're getting close to time here. So I just want to end on, so sketching, I teach a class that's called Sketching and Mindfulness. It's one that I really enjoy teaching. And I think it's great to combine these two things. I've been practicing mindfulness meditation for a long time, and it's nice to bring them together. And sketching can be a practice for mindful awareness of our surroundings, and also being mindful while you're drawing can kind of calm those self-doubting, those self-critical thoughts that can kind of mess up your enjoyment and your ability to learn. So we'll start by focusing on movements. We'll focus on materials. And just experimenting and sort of just non-judgmental, playing around with what happens on the page. And then we'll sort of pick up a natural object and we'll really explore the natural object and try to capture it, but just really looking at shapes and angles and proportions and lights and darks. So for me, drawing and teaching also, it's just not about that end product, that final thing that you get. It's really about that process and that exploration and the way it changes how you notice what's in the world around you. So that's it. And I just wanted to encourage you to ask questions. I love questions. And I think, let's see, I'll hand that back to Jennifer.
Thank you, Erica, so much for a really beautifully illustrated talk and such a look into your personal artistic journey. Um, just a reminder to our audience to please enter your questions into the Q&A function, and I will make sure that we ask them of Erica. I think the first question is about drawing and this idea that it's really a unique and powerful way to communicate, and I wonder if you might speak a little bit more about that.
So I think drawing is, there's the act of, there's what you have to do to create the drawing, right? And we can just respond to what we're looking at to create that drawing. But if we're thinking about, how are we going to convey something through the drawing, convey it to someone else, we have to think about how other people see things, and we have to think about more deeply about what it is we're trying to convey. So I think it's got that power, but it's one of those things where you have to sort of mentally connect a little bit with your audience too as you do it, to kind of understand what how they're going to see what you draw. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, thank you. We have a question about your favorite kinds of things to draw. So, do you have favorite species, or if you already mentioned birds, that of course, which we love to hear. Um, but do you have favorite species or specific animals you like to draw?
Oh, well, I love birds, as you said, and for some reason, herons really attract me. There's so much character and so much elegance, and they can also look wonderfully awkward too. So it's fun to explore that. Um, and I think also, I mean, everything, right? But insects too. I really enjoy drawing insects and sort of exploring that incredible variety and the colors and the patterns and all of that.
Interesting. And when you draw insects, are you drawing from life or from specimens, like say at the Natural History Museum?
Both. Definitely, it's great to be able to work from specimens, occasionally even from live insects, not too often, but also yeah, I like work a lot from photographs too. As an illustrator, you sort of photographs are often your go-to.
Hmm. We have a question about studies. So, do you think it's necessary to study at a university to get to the point where you are? Is it necessary to be able to communicate your art and connect it with nature?
So I really don't think a university education is what you need. I mean, it's great if you can get there because it gives you this kind of concentrated, focused time to do it and a community to do it within. But I think you can learn a lot just on your own, just by doing. And there's just an incredible number of resources out there. I mean, books, but also websites, blogs, online videos. One of my favorite things to do is just when I'm tired on a Sunday is just to watch videos of people drawing on YouTube, you know. So you can learn so much that way too. So no, I don't think university education is necessary at all for that.
Thank you. Um, Somewhat related question, and I think our audience is very curious about, pen and ink versus digital illustration these days. And we have a specific question about the medium. So, how do you choose, which medium you're going to employ? Is it about the subject matter? Is it about a specific project? But how do you choose between, given all the traditional and digital choices, how do you arrive at that?
It's a great question. Yeah, I think one of the things, unfortunately, it's a boring answer, but efficiency, right? I think I go to digital when I want to be efficient, when I want to be able to get something done relatively quickly. Illustration doesn't pay that well, to be perfectly frank, right? And so you want to be able to work as quickly as you can. Um, but I also love this sort of experimentation that you can do with the digital stuff. When my go-to is really like pencils and pens are just great. That ability to get that tactile quality, paper textures, and really play around with those things. So that would be my day-to-day go-to. And if you're practicing, I think those are much better for practice than digital because you can do just tons of it very very loosely and very quickly and have that physical experience of doing it too, that tactile experience.
Did it take you some time to kind of get used to the digital drawing, sort of like you were saying about the pads that you use and how they've gotten better with the sensitivity of how hard you're pressing and that kind of thing? Was that a steep learning curve?
It was a steep learning curve. It was really quite tricky, especially just to look straight ahead when everything seems to be going on down here and to get comfortable. But once it kind of clicked, it was started to become more and more intuitive.
We have a great question about connecting, connecting art with nature. So, what do you think has been the most effective way in which you've been able to really connect your art with nature and really have an impact on people that you're teaching?
I think really the nature journaling thing has been it. There's just something a bit magical about it. I don't know what it is. I think one of the reasons that art and science in one program worked really well is that the nature journal wasn't the focus. That wasn't what we were trying to do, is get them to make great drawings in their nature journal. But just that act of having that I don't know what it is, that sort of mediation of okay, I've got my pencil and paper and I'm going to try to capture those shapes. It just gets people looking differently and noticing a lot more. So that's definitely the number one.
Mm. We have a question about working from photographs. So, do you have techniques to avoid it looking too obviously from a photograph? And if you're working from photos you've found on websites, do you have to make sure that there's a license to use it? These are very technical, practical questions from our audience.
Those are both really good questions. So let me start with the second one. So yes, the right, people's photographs are their intellectual property, their artistic property, and you don't want to just copy them directly and then publish them, right? You can copy them directly, and it's always nice to sort of write who you copied from. But you can do that as just a way of learning. It's just the publishing part of it that's not good. But when you're doing an illustration that's going to be published, you want to use multiple photographic sources so that you can take aspects from different, unless you have direct permission from the photographer, in which case you can work directly. But otherwise, no, you want to take from multiple images and sort of gradually change from there, if that makes sense.
Great. Um, how do you choose objects to draw?
Mm. Um, Well, it's nice. I'm not doing a lot of sort of paid illustration these days where somebody says, "Oh, draw this." So I get to choose whatever I want, and that's almost always these days birds. But it's yeah, I think it's just sort of on a whim what's particularly interesting me. Reading is also one of those things. Like I read a lot about nature, and if I get into a particular subject, then I want to go and try and explore that. So I might go back to shells, or I might go back to insects or something, depending on reading as well.
That's interesting. Um, yeah, we just got a question in. What inspires you to draw something for your own pleasure? I mean, you just sort of spoke to that, but I don't know if you want to say more about that.
Lots of things. I think character is one of them. If something just has a sense of energy or emotion, that's often something I was like, how do you capture that in a drawing? And I want to try to challenge myself to capture that. But also just light on form and all the interesting things that it does. And how it's different on feathers or it's different on scales, or
Mm.
so one of whatever's sort of moving me in those directions at the time.
We have a question about paintings. So, do you do paintings, oil paintings, acrylics, or do you feel like it's sort of too heavy or not as, I don't know, sort of free as drawing?
I think painting can be really, really free and really wonderful. I'm not definitely not a painter. I do watercolor sometimes, and I do enjoy watercolor. I think of it more as a drawing medium actually, because
Mm.
it's flat. When you get into acrylics and oil painting, you're doing something very three-dimensional. You're building all that stuff on top of one another. There's just there's this what they call it like a plastic aspect to it, where you're almost like sculpting stuff on top of the canvas. And that's never, it's something I'd love to be able to do, but it's not something I've spent a lot of time on. So some future time, I would love to do more of that.
We have a question about this, the process versus the end product. You talked a little bit about this, right? That we shouldn't be so focused on, and I think this applies more broadly. I think there's a philosophical point you're making here too, right? That we shouldn't be so focused on the end product and the perfection, but that it's about the process, right? And when you're in a drawing rut, as you said, to kind of experiment and take yourself completely out of your comfort zone, and you'll discover all kinds of things you didn't even know were there. But we have a specific question about kind of visualizing that end product. Do you, when you approach your subject, when you plan to draw something, do you have that idea of what you want that finished product to be? And are you sort of fighting against that? Or, do you kind of develop and sort of let it go where it needs to go?
That's a really, really interesting question. Yeah, I've never been very good at picturing what I want the final product to look like, so that might be in some ways helpful to me.
Mm.
It's those preparatory sketches, those playing around things that sort of get me to, okay, that's sort of heading in the right direction, and then I can kind of keep going with that. I always admire people who can say, okay, I'm going to draw X, and then it's going to look like this, and then they just sit there and do it. That's sort of a different skill set that I don't have, but I think the more I've been able to just loosen up and see what happens on the page, the more I've discovered things that are interesting that then I want to keep working at and enhance and sort of bring out in a drawing. So the freer I think the more you have to discover and then develop.
Great. We have a question about these moving creatures. As we know, birds do a lot of that. How do you have any tips or any ideas about, capturing images of moving creatures?
Yeah, that's a hard one. If you've ever sat in front of a bird feeder and tried to draw the birds, it's the amount of movement is incredible. So I have a lot of tips about that, but one of them is just to have a big piece of paper and do multiple drawings at the same time. So start a sketch and when the bird's in one position, start another one when it moves, because it'll often move back eventually to the same or a similar position. So sort of get used to drawing multiple drawings at once. That can really help. Also, just feel like you can just draw right over your drawing. You saw in that one of those early Lansdowne drawings how he just kept drawing over it in different positions, which is great. But also, a really great trick is to watch if you're interested in drawing, say, I don't know, woodpeckers or something. If you watch videos of those woodpeckers and pause them periodically and sketch as you go, then when you're sketching them from life, you will have gotten very familiar with the forms and you'll be able to sketch better. So, more YouTube, I think.
Um, we have a question about just your favorite uh, medium. So, what really is your favorite artistic method or medium that you've used, throughout your career?
Pencils. It's kind of
Mm,
a boring answer, I think, but it's just amazing what you can do with a number with a not a number two, but a 2B pencil that you can go really dark, you can go really light, and I just love the subtle gradations you can get and the richness of it.
mm. Do you ever set out to create a drawing for yourself versus a third person audience? And how do you approach that? And you've talked a little bit about this already, but if you have more to say about that.
Um, well, it's nice to be in a stage where it's kind of I get to go where whim takes me, you know. And I'll say I do a lot of cartooning. It's sort of a thing I do to relax, and so um, I'll do a lot of that just as kind of a natural like this is a thing that is relaxing and fun to do. But yeah, I have all these things that I would like to do when I have the time, which would be like more of those really detailed bird heads and things.
Mm,
One of the
yeah, the heads that you did for Lorna's book with the 12 different bird heads, absolutely amazing. And I love the idea that you're working together, artists and scientists on, coming up with, the best sort of way to depict that. So it's, Lorna's descriptions and, your artistic descriptions, right, and interpretations. Really, we're all very excited to see that book when it comes out in April. So everyone stay tuned. I think we are just about out of time. Let me see if I think we've answered all of our questions. Oh, we have one last question. Um, any, are there any other wild out of the box applications for drawing? Someone asked.
um, I think they mean like ways of using drawing, and I think it's just
Yeah.
a great collaborative tool. It's a great way to go back and forth with someone thinking through something. It doesn't necessarily need to be a visual thing. It could be, you know, how are we gonna get to Mars or whatever, you know, and go back and forth and try to figure that out on paper. So that's what comes to mind.
Excellent. Well, Erica, thank you so much.
Thank
This
you.
was fascinating, obviously beautifully illustrated. We'll have to have you back for, love to see the cartooning. Let's have that be your next talk. I think we'd all love to see that, especially if it features birds. But thank you so much for your wonderful talk and telling us so much about your personal journey. It was really amazing and an honor to have you with us. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. The talk has been recorded and will be posted on our website as well as our YouTube channel, so you can watch it again and also share it with friends. And we hope that you'll follow us on social media and sign up for our e-newsletter so you can stay aware of all of the amazing programs that we offer at MABA and at Mass Audubon. And of course, stay tuned for our next lecture series, news about the next lecture series, which we are starting to plan already. And finally, these amazing lectures are made possible only by people like you who generously support us. So please consider making a gift to the museum so we can continue to bring fabulous artists like Erica and all of our speakers from this season to you. Please consider becoming a member of Mass Audubon if you are not already. And thank you for being a part of our community. And don't forget to check out the website, find out more about what we're doing and our new beautiful building we are planning to build in Concord, Massachusetts. And with that, I will thank you all, especially Erica, and have a wonderful night.